Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Ryan Toxopeus. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. The audience knows my schedule's been crazy. All these crazy things. Like one day, I had a storm, and I was like, had somebody supposed to be on. And I was glad I rescheduled them. I was like running late, and I like couldn't make it home in time.
Oh no.
Then we like lost power and stuff. It was crazy. But yeah, I'm glad that we could get you on. And it always drives me nuts when I can't get an author on because I always ask people on for a reason. Particularly once I get the questions formed ahead of time because I like really want to know the answers. So it's almost like you get all the way to the end of a an entire television show and you don't actually watch the last episode. So I'm really glad that we could get you on today and
Yeah,
share your books with everybody. So
yeah. It took a while, but we finally got here.
yeah. Well, I was just telling my wife we're like down the road and our food got messed up. And I was just like looking at the clock. I was like, she goes, "Are we gonna make it?" I go, "We're gonna make it." I'm like, "I'm not about to reschedule on Ryan again." I was like, "We're gonna make it." And sure enough, we did by the seat of our pants. But don't worry, everybody in the audience. All right, I won't leave you hanging. They fixed my sandwich. All right, we're good to go. So, Ryan, we'll start with that first question there. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Sure. I mean, I guess it depends on how far back you want to go. Because I remember back in kindergarten, I loved writing, and I wrote this story about a blob monster. And so I was actually kind of surprised a few years later when I saw a movie trailer on TV for the movie The Blob, and it just reminded me of the one-page story that I'd written in kindergarten. So I've always enjoyed uh, writing creatively through school. I actually wanted to take creative writing back when I was in high school, but it conflicted with physics,
Mhm.
and I at that time had wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to get into electrical engineering, maybe
Hmm.
get into robotics and stuff like that.
Oh, cool.
Um, and so I was like, well, I guess there aren't too many people who want to take physics and creative writing, so that's why there was the conflict there. Um, but yeah, I kept writing on and off in my spare time. I wrote this enormous space opera when I was in my early 20s,
Oh, wow.
and uh, it, it was garbage. Like,
Been there.
it'll never see the light of day. I don't even think I have a physical copy of it anymore. Um, but one of my friends in engineering had heard that I was writing this book, and she saw a contest on campus for writing short stories, and the top prize was $750. And she's like, "You
Oh,
should try
wow.
this. You should try this." So I was like, "Well, I guess. I mean, what can it hurt, right?" So I uh, I wrote a story about a World War II Dutch resistance fighter who was captured by the Nazis, put in a concentration camp, scheduled to die, but he managed to work his way out of it and escape. And uh, when the results came in that I had won the contest, I was shocked. And apparently the judges were too, because when I went to pick up the winnings, they're like, "We're not used to engineering students entering these contests, never mind winning them." So that was a nice surprise all around, I guess. But yeah, after that, uh, I I finished that space opera. I tried sending it out to some agents. I didn't hear anything back. I got very discouraged, and I stopped writing for a long time. But when my daughter was born, one of my best friends came to visit and see the baby, and we got to talking about these D&D campaigns that I'd
Mhm.
run when we were younger, like teenagers, early 20s type of thing. And he asked me if I'd ever thought about writing up some of those old stories as books, and I said no. Um, but over the course of the day, as we were visiting, he talked me into it, and I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. what's it going to hurt, right? So I spent the next year just in my spare time, whenever I could, hammering out a few thousand words here and there. Um, got the first draft done, and I was like, okay, I don't even know what to do with it at this point. So I'm just going to sit on it. It wasn't long after that that I was walking through the university where I worked, and I saw a flyer up for an editor who was looking for student papers to edit. And I
Mm.
thought, well, I guess I could look into this. And so I got in touch with her, and she was really excited about it because she wanted to edit larger works like
Oh,
novels
that's
and stuff,
cool.
and she hadn't gotten into it yet. So she gave me a really good rate. We worked together, and I got my first copy of my first book, A Noble's Quest, all done. I I self-published it as an ebook on Smashwords, and uh, I got a couple of really great reviews on it from people I didn't know. It really got me excited for it. So I thought, well, I got to do more than just this little project now that I made my own cover art and stuff. Like it looked terrible. Um, but yeah, I finally got an artist, Harvey Bunda. I found him online, and he is absolutely amazing. He's just not only an amazing artist, like he's done work for LucasArts and
Oh,
Marvel
wow.
and all kinds of stuff, but he's just a really great guy too. So I had a very specific idea for how I wanted the cover to look, based on kind of the 80s and 90s fantasy where you'd see
Oh, yeah.
a scene from the book on the cover. And
Yeah.
so I had a specific idea that I wanted, and he made it even better than I imagined it. So that was great. And once I got that, then I got my books into print, updated the ebooks, and my ex-wife's aunt read it, and she said, "Did you pay for that editing?" That's like, "Oh no, really?" And I guess she had done some work editing documents and stuff when she was working, and she was retired. She offered to help, and I gladly accepted. So I worked with her through all four of the novels that I have out now, and it was just awesome. Like she's so great, and yeah, that pretty much wraps up the journey up to this point.
I had somebody on earlier and we were literally talking about that, and he was like, "Yeah, it really is a journey." I was like, "It really is. It really is." Much like Odysseus, sometimes it's has its twists and turns, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Like it's anything but a straight line.
Yeah. I had somebody on a couple weeks ago, a female author, and she was like, "Yeah, I just decided like a year ago." She was, "I'm probably not like most people you have on." I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" She's like, "Yeah, like a year ago, I just decided I was just gonna write and did this thing." And I was like, "Yeah, that's a lot different than what most people." I was like, "I'm in like, like 15 years now or something like that." So I was like, "Yeah, seems to be a lot different." But each to their own. I mean, I wish I could have just been like, "Oh yeah, I'm just gonna do this." I kind of feel like I was listening to Dirk Ashton talk on Wizards, Words, and Words. He shared a really cool Pablo Picasso story of Picasso. Like somebody came up to him after he was already famous and was like, "Oh, can you draw on this napkin a masterpiece?" He's like, "Yeah, I will." They're like, "Oh, 30 seconds, I'll buy it from you." So he did. And then he handed it to him, it was like $15 million. And they're like, "What do you mean it took you 30 seconds?" He's like, "Yeah, it took me 30 seconds to draw you a masterpiece, but it's taken me 35 years to learn how to draw a masterpiece in 30 seconds." And that just blew my mind. I was like, that to me feels like a lot like most writers, that you hear where they're like, "Oh, I have this story in my head," or, "I need to write a book rather than want to write a book." So it's kind of
Yeah,
interesting to see where, different people's. I actually got that question from a listener actually, almost a year ago now, and I'm glad that they, said that. They're like, "Oh, please don't say my name," but if they're listening, I am very glad because it's definitely helped me out to remember, that it is a journey, and everybody starts in a different place. But it's fun to see, people like yourself who have written multiple books, because it does tell everybody else like it's possible. You just have to, put the work and the time in. So I always like to
Yeah,
start with that one. It's motivational. So
yeah, and it's funny. The more books I write, the less time I have for writing. Uh, you know, because you're trying to get people to even know that you are that you exist and that your
yeah,
books exist. And so
yep,
you spend a lot more time on social media and podcasts like this, and
yep.
trying to get your name out there, get those books in front of people, and
Oh yeah.
it's less and less time for actually writing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's like my friend. He's like, "You haven't read a lot this year compared to normal." I said, "Well, I've interviewed like almost 50 people." I said, and on top of that, I said I have, this novella that's, draft one's gonna be done soon. I said I was writing on draft two of my fantasy book. I was like, I planned out pretty much like the other two prequel novellas. I said I fixed a lot of the urban fantasy I want to do. I said I also wrote some of my historical urban fantasy, Romans versus zombies. Like I was just like, it's just been a lot of writing. And I was like, at the end of the day, after podcasting and writing, I'm like, I try to read, but it's just like I'm just too burnt out by it. So I usually just end up
Exactly.
doing more work for the podcast. I just write another chapter.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. It's amazing. Like, the time has to come from somewhere, right? There aren't enough hours in the day
Yep.
to do everything that I want to do.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you have
Yep.
to kind of prioritize.
Yep, and that's what my wife. We just went and hung with hung with her and my friend, and saw my nephew and my sister-in-law, and I'm like I'm not about to cut that time down, and I got goals for the podcast, and and I like meeting people. I've had a lot of people I've met and talked to like yourself, where I just had Ash Bishop on earlier today, and he already has my mind working, before my evening writing session, where I'm like, oh, that was a really good idea. So I always get stuff, really good. That's like everybody's always like, you're so nice doing the podcast. I'm like, yeah, I'm just like trying to get greatness from osmosis, like and it's like literally it's like I'm like, yeah, it's a free podcast for me and you, but at the same time, the to get to sit every week and talk to multiple authors, even one author a week it's a treat, because I don't know about you, but it's really hard in my town to find somebody that writes, let alone writes fantasy, science fiction, horror, anything other than fiction or historical reference. Like
Yeah,
it's difficult.
when I lived in Guelph, Ontario, I was running a group for genre fiction,
Oh,
and we
that's
had
cool.
a small group of 10 to 12 people that would meet every month or two, and we'd just sit around and chat and talk shop, talk about life, all that kind of stuff. But when I moved to Saskatoon, haven't had that same opportunity yet. And I did see that there's a group that you have to pay for to be
Mm,
included in, and I was like, I don't know if I want to go through a paywall to talk to other authors. Like, it
yeah,
should just be something that you're doing for fun and networking, and uh, I don't know. It just rubbed me the wrong way, so I didn't try that. And then the pandemic happened, so can't get
yeah,
out and meet anybody.
yeah. No, it's true. That's why my friend's like, you should just because we couldn't go to like convention after convention after convention. He's like, yeah, you should just think about doing that. I was like, thought about it. I was like, yeah, that's a really good idea. So yeah, I'm definitely glad that I did something rather than just kind of, you know, sitting around here wishing I talked to people. So it's definitely been far more beneficial for myself. So and it's nice to hear, like I said earlier, hear people be like, oh yeah, that was really helpful. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. So it's nice when things work out like that. So
Yeah,
well, that
yeah.
kind of
Always
brings
nice
us.
to feel like you're helping somebody.
Yeah. Well, that's like, I tell my students and my athletes all the time. I just said this to a kid the other day where she was struggling and I'm like, what's going on? She's like, oh, I just got some personal stuff. And I said, okay. I said, well, it's her second year with me. I said, what do I always say to do? She's like, stop worrying about myself. Look to the person next to me, help them out. I'll feel better. So then she literally did that and she started helping people. She's a great leader. Start helping people. By the end, she was smiling, she was having fun, whatever was bugging her earlier, completely out. And I always thought to myself, I just don't want to be one of those people that enters this business just asking people for things, and
Mhm.
never offers anything. So and I was like, oh, it'd be kind of cool, to do this. I said, I get some of the things I need without having to ask, and then, you can help people. And I kind of thought I was going to be more selfish about it and be like, oh, can I get this or whatever? And it's really just been like super, super fun just to, get people's books out there. I've had a couple people approach me and be like, "Oh, I know I'm not a big name." I'm like, "I don't care. Like, are you within the genres that we're talking about?" And I got some mystery writers that are going to come on really soon too for season 3 and stuff. Because I want to learn how to write a mystery novel, within a fantasy or sci-fi setting, and I want it to be good, and
Yeah.
I'm like, like the more the merrier, and I'll never turn anybody down, who wants, to gain some readers. It takes an hour, 45 minutes, and you're done. It might be an hour and a half work for each person, in my entire life. But a couple people were cool. Like one of the guys blew up. He's like, we have over 1,050 downloads just on one platform for him. And he's like our number
Oh,
one episode now. Yeah. And he was like, oh, that's really cool. So I'm hoping eventually, like, even if he gets 20 lifetime readers out of that, which I think would be a low number with his particular books and writing style. But it's cool to be like, oh, I did that. I just want one person that I have on to blow up, and then I
that
would
would be
consider
awesome.
it successful. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
cool.
you really can't say enough how much those super fans are worth. Like, not
I,
just because they buy all of your titles, but like I have a couple of guys that like tell everybody they know about my
mm,
books and they just love them and they're like, you gotta read these. And
mm,
they encouraged me to get an audiobook done for my first book. And
oh, cool.
uh, I've run into some issues with ACX since that's
Mm,
been out, so I haven't been pushing that as hard. But uh, yeah, it's super fans make it all worthwhile. Like
yeah.
just hearing that enthusiasm and excitement for anything that you put out, it still blows my mind that it happens.
Yeah, yeah. That's like I, mentioned Christopher G. Brenning on here a lot. And he just asked me last night. He sent me book 2 for him, and I loved his book 1. It was one of the top 3 books I've read in the last 5, 10 years. And he was like, "Did you get a chance yet?" I'm like, "No." I was like, "I'm literally just like every day working." I'm like, I haven't had a chance. I was like, as soon as I get, so and so's book done, I was like, I'm gonna be on it. I promise. He's like, "Oh, you're gonna love it." He's like, "I wrote it for, super fans like you, and there's a couple other guys and some ladies that we've really helped try to help him in the last year." Because I'm like, the more successful you guys are, the more stories we get. And I tell Christopher all the time, I'm like, it's not altruism. I'm like, I'm selfish. I want more books. So, and if you guys don't, get readers and get paid enough for it, you can't make another book. So I always tease him. I'm
Exactly.
like, I'm selfish. I was like, I just want you to keep writing. So, which actually leads us perfectly into that second question here. What genre or genres do you currently write in?
Currently, the works that I'm doing are fantasy. So my books tend to skew towards young adult fantasy and epic fantasy. And so I'm working very slowly on my fifth book, um, just because uh, I brought out the fourth book. Uh, I was just swamped for time, so I just kind of threw it out there and hoped for the best. And I got the sales that I expected from the people that I knew were going to buy the book, and a few extras, and that was about it. So it fell a bit short of my aspirations because I'd heard that once you get 4 to 6 books, they start kind of feeding on each other, and you get that backlog of people reading a book and then going back and finding your other stuff. And so I was kind of hoping for a bit of a snowball effect, but it didn't happen. So I guess I'm not going to see that kind of success at book 4. So I'm going to keep going with books 5, 6, 7, all the way up to 10 for this particular. I don't want to call it a series because it's actually 3 different series that are all linked. So I completed my first fantasy trilogy a couple of years ago, and now this new book, the fourth book that I wrote, is a brand new series. It starts off 450 years after the conclusion of the first series, so it's
Wow.
brand new cast of characters and stuff. And I just I, I, I know I'm not alone in this, but I always catch flack for it when I say it. I'm not one of those people that likes really long fantasy series that you have to read through the entire thing. It's like, 10, 12 books, and it gets tired
Oh
after
yeah.
a while. Um, the example that I usually go to that people hate me saying is Wheel of Time. I got 4 books into that, and he's just throwing in more and more characters, and I wasn't seeing the characters that I started with and cared about anymore. And I just kept trying to power through because my buddy said, this series is amazing, and it's like just amazing how all the threads come together in it, and it's gonna blow your mind. And I got to book 4. I was like, I can't even remember if I read about this character before or not. Like, I don't know what they're doing. And I just found it frustrating. So I told him, I'm sorry, I don't think I can finish this one. And he said, oh, if you can't, if you're feeling that way by book 4, it's good to
Oh,
stop, because if you get to book
yeah.
7, it's
Yep.
it's a big thick book that is one day. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh.
The
So
Audible helped a lot for me, I have to say. Like, because I was just like, I had to book, I think I got to book 5, and then I went to the Audible, and then it it was just so much better than in my head. Like, and I was able to keep better track of everybody and everything. And then I went and read book 6 right after that. And then I listened to book 6 on Audible like a month after that. And then I got to book 7, and I tried the first prologue's like 75 pages. I told my buddy,
oh,
I was like, we're gonna book club it. We've been book clubbing Mal's and Book of the Fall, and I have to say that has helped so much. Like, it's just been a game changer. I told my buddy, like, I would have stopped at book 3. I love Dead House Gates, like it was good, but like there were parts in Gardens of the Moon where I was just like, holy moly. And now we're in book 8, Toll the Hounds, and we're like literally on like page 858, and we just started this new chapter, and he just introduced like 25 new characters. And I'm like, I get that you got like another 550 pages in this book, but I'm like, there's only one more left of the main storyline. I'm like, how on earth, is this gonna get tied together? I enjoy reading, I enjoy reading it for the characters, but there's so much where I'm like, this could have been like, 9 books, 3 trilogies each, like,
yeah.
and been like 350 pages, like that's just, I know people are gonna be like, oh, how dare you? But there's just so much where I'm just like, I skip, or I skim. I'm a pretty quick reader, so I'll just run through as long as I get the idea, and I'm like, then I'll get to something good, and I'll go over it. But yeah, sometimes I actually liked Wheel of Time more when I did the Audible, because I was kind of like book clubbing with myself, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't write books like that. Like, I give people credit. I can't write books that big. I think more of a, I like the Forgotten Realms, like how those
Me
were,
too.
like, yeah, Dragonlance, Ravenloft, the
Yeah.
Magic the Gathering. I like 3 to 5, at a time, the Dritz, series, things like that.
For
We're
sure.
ongoing, but in trilogies or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
some of those
And
bigger ones get hard for me, and I can't imagine writing them. I just don't think it's in me.
no, no. And I mean, you hear interviews with someone like George Martin, who writing the oh my god, and he's talking to his super fans to remember details that he's
Yeah.
forgotten,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. I saw an interview. Yeah. I saw an interview where he did that. I was like, holy crap. Like, and that's like my buddy the other day. He asked me something because I'm like, we're playing a D&D game. I mentioned this a little bit in interviews, but we're playing a D&D game, 5th edition. Well, I have it set in my own fantasy world. And I have to say, it's been one of the greatest creative ways to fix a couple of things for world building. I've gotten great. I'm like, oh, that's super cool. And I'll let my party do something. I'm like, oh, I got to add that. And it's not specific to 5e, which is kind of nice. Like, I have these creatures I created who are like a mold-based crystalline species, and they have like a golem. And it was like, well, instead of just being a golem, I was like, I want it to be made out of this. And then I have like this whole where like the reds versus the blues versus like the greens and the blacks, like crystals, like these people, and they have these tribal wars going on and stuff. And there's just all sorts of cool things that I've gotten from it. And I'm like, oh, like the gaming community has really helped me, in terms of, it's like video game or, like D&D, like role playing based games have been really helpful. But
yeah,
yeah.
I absolutely love role playing games, and honestly, D&D has got me through this pandemic. I like the people that I've
Oh
been
yeah.
playing with. I run 2 different groups in the same world of my own creation, and
Oh,
they're
that's
both
awesome.
they're both facing the same big bad, but from separate parts of the world. So one of them is kind of started off near the equator in a desert city, and then the other one started off way in the far north, and the threat was between them. So it was a little bit closer to the south. So they were running more of a horror campaign because the undead were there, and so they're just running for their lives from the big bad right away, like he's on their tail. And meanwhile, the group in the north is getting more of a slow burn where it's like, oh, there's a zombie, like one undead, but it's kind of like the harbinger of something worse that's coming. Like this, it's this huge wave, unstoppable wave that's coming to the north, and so the threat gets worse and worse as they go. And I think my favorite part about that is having the two groups um, not interacting, but their stories tying together
Well, that's cool.
in important ways. Like the group up north found this cave early on in their adventures, and they didn't really do a good job of exploring it. It was this perfectly circular room with a light stone in the middle of it and a dark stone underneath. And so they bundled them up and took them with them. They're like, oh, these are cool. I wonder what they're for. And then a few months later, the group down south had been fleeing with this book that they couldn't read. Eventually, they found a wizard who learned the comprehend languages spell, and she started reading through it. And that player is actually in both groups. She's the only one that's in both the North and South group. And so I gave her the write up for that book for her to read through. And I told her, okay, we're going to do this in a phased way. Like you can read through it all now, but it's going to take your character time to read each chapter. And then you can discuss it with the party
Oh,
like
that's cool.
once every hour of like the game passing. And so she read the whole thing right away, and she was like, oh my God, I need to tell them all of this right now because it is so important for the Northern group, where they found out that these stones were often used in holy sites to lock down big bad threats. And
Mm,
so there was something evil underneath where that daystone was.
oh,
And
that's cool.
yeah, so they worked out this crazy way of sending a Pegasus rider to the north to give them news. Like, if you find this stone, don't remove it. And of course, by that time they already had.
Yeah.
But it gave them all a real sense of dread that they had done something really, really bad. So I just love the way that it's tied together, and everybody, they're talking about the games between sessions and stuff and having a lot of fun with it. So
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, it's been a really joyful type of thing for me through the
Oh, yeah.
pandemic. And I know some of the other players have said, this campaign has kept me going. Like, you guys are awesome, and it's just been so nice to have people that I can talk to regularly when, especially in those early days when we were all locked
Yeah.
in our houses and couldn't
Yep.
go out.
Yeah.
So no, I love the collaborative storytelling aspect of it, and it's just, yeah, D&D is amazing. I'm glad the world is finally catching on to that.
Yeah. Yeah. My friend was like, yeah, I started playing that game that you've been talking about for whatever. Like, I think this year, probably like 16 falls ago. So for 16 years. And I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, it's really fun. I'm like, yeah, been saying that for 16 years. I was like, I knew you like it, He plays all sorts of same video games I like and stuff. I was like, oh man. I was like, imagine if you had done it 16 years ago. You could have 16 more years of fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I uh, I started playing almost 30 years ago now.
Mm.
When I was in elementary school, some of my friends introduced me to it, and I fell in love with it right away.
Yeah, it's definitely my cup of tea, as I always say. So that third one there, you got me thinking about D&D now. What is your Empire's Foundation fantasy trilogy about, and how did you come up with this idea?
So as I alluded to, this was based on Dungeons and Dragons games that I ran back in the day. And what happened was my buddy who talked me into it had played in the first campaign,
Hmm.
which I'm writing now as a 4-book
Oh,
series.
that's cool.
And he didn't, but he had moved away. So I started a new campaign after, and we'd run that one for a couple of years. And then he moved away. So I started a new one, not really thinking it was going to be tied to the campaign that I had just run. Um, and we were playing through it, and I started getting ideas for how like threads could work together, and all of a sudden I'm running a prequel campaign, which turned out really great because when the big bad showed up, uh, the players had already faced the big bad in the future.
Hmm.
So in the original campaign, so they knew that the big bad was still going to be around, and they're like, "Oh no, this is not going to end well for our characters." But yeah, they created Thomas and Cerintha, who were a couple of lumberjacks, and we just started off. They were just commoners, like they didn't have a class or anything. We built up the characters with they'd buy skill points and attribute points as we were going. And once we got a little bit in, one of my buddies, his wife had just been listening to us play, and she's like, "So you guys just sit around and make up ideas and like talk, make stories together? Like that sounds pretty easy. Can I try?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure." So she came and joined and created the character Eliza, and it just yeah, she hit it out of the park right away. She created kind of this roguish princess type, and
Hmm.
just loved her character. And so she's actually on the cover of my first book
Oh,
as
that's
well.
cool.
Yeah, and so now I'm finally at the series that my buddy originally loved, and it got me uh, wanting to write in the first place.
Hmm.
So it's but it's funny because not everything, you forget things that happen at the
Oh
table.
yeah, totally.
Something some things don't translate well
Hmm.
to a novel format, like some of the silliness that happens around the table. But
That's fair.
uh, if you uh, I've had people who have played role-playing games read my books, and they say, "Oh yeah, you can definitely tell that this was a D&D campaign. Like it has that kind of feel to it." And so I was really excited about that. And it loses that feel a little bit in the third book, just because um, my characters decided that they wanted to go in a direction that I hadn't anticipated. Like I'll always
Well,
do a
that
loose
feeling.
I'll do a loose outline for my books, where I'll like put down all the chapter headings and like a brief idea of what's going to happen in each chapter. Um, but Cerintha at one point looked at Thomas when Thomas said, "I had this dream. We need to go south. There's something big there." And Cerintha was like, "You're drunk and crazy. I'm not going with you." And I was like, "Oh no." So I kind of chased his idea as like, worst case scenario, if I get lost somewhere in this, I can come back here and just write it the way that I'd planned it. But I wanted to see the way that felt most natural to the characters in that moment.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so all three characters went on their own separate adventures, and it worked out so beautifully. It was better than I had originally planned it, and so
Hmm.
I kept it and never looked back.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's always cool when I just think it's like, I was just talking to my gaming group about this because some stuff came up and it was just so funny. And I was just like, it's funny you mention that because I was like, I don't know if I could put this into a book, but like my buddy and I, it was like the same thing. We had this one campaign, and I just think like with your covers in particular and like the blurbs and everything, like I just felt like it was him and me playing this mini campaign while we were waiting for everybody. It's like before the pandemic. And we were waiting on some people to graduate from college. One of our friends had just had a baby, and him and I came and played with and like two NPCs with this one very young DM. It was like her first time, but she's just amazing storyteller. And it's so funny because when I first saw, like, I'm trying to remember which book I saw first. I think it was actually A Noble's Quest, and I was just like, oh, that's like totally just reminded me of, like that campaign. And that campaign got me back into loving D&D and just like, storytelling just in general. When it was at a very burnout time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one I was just like, oh, that's so cool. I was like, so I immediately went and checked out the blurb, and I was just like, I got that sense. I was like, yeah, this is definitely, there's a lot of D&D history here. So yeah, I definitely could
Yeah.
definitely feel it just from the blurb and the cover, and from the reviews and things like that. So that was really cool. It was very, I told him the other day too, because he's in my current campaign. I was like, nothing beats our, the characters that we had in that campaign and the things they did, like it was just so much fun. That's all we were doing, was just trying to have fun. We weren't trying to gain levels or get gold or anything. It was just about having fun. So that just really reminded me of that time. So it was super cool.
Yeah, yeah, and that's exactly what I'm trying to capture with my writing. It's just supposed to be fun, like quick pace.
Yeah,
Uh, I'm not, I don't uh, aspire to be like Tolkien or something where it's all
yeah,
very over explained and
yeah.
all that stuff and kind of slow. Everybody's walking everywhere and you get to hear about every step they take. It's,
They make a
you know,
stew at every fire. It only takes an hour.
yeah, yeah. So I like to kind of filter it down to the important parts,
Mm,
or the interesting parts, because
yeah,
I figure if I get bored writing it, people are going to get bored reading it. So
yeah, yeah. That's always the fear, right? My novella right now, like I have so many cool things. I'm like, the problem is though, is like, I feel like it's very end heavy, like when you're getting to the climax. But I'm like, people are gonna have to get through the first, 8,000 words and be intrigued by the sprinkles I leave. If you get to the end, especially for the first one, you're gonna be like, holy bleep, like what happened, like what's about to happen, but that's the one thing I'm most worried about with beta readers for, after draft one, like are they going to be patient enough and see that there's a story here? And
right.
I tell you, this new generation of just not just like of kids or whatever, but just like everybody of, TV, I feel like we get so spoiled, off of certain shows where, like, I don't know, my friend, I asked him about the first season of Mandalorian. He's like, oh yeah, the first three episodes were great, the other ones were crap, and then the last three were really good. Well, the ones that he didn't like were some of my favorite TV writing of all time. And I was like, they were just fun Star Wars adventures. And I was like, what is he supposed to do? Go fight the whole empire by himself? I was just like, and I just think that, the way that people talk about Stranger Things in particular, in different shows, or, Miss Marvel, I'm on like, I think episode 4. I've absolutely loved it from a writer standpoint. Thor 4
I
I thought
haven't,
was great, like
yeah, I haven't watched Miss Marvel yet. It's
I
on
you
my
know
list.
I gotta say, my friend just said last week, he's like, oh, you really gotta try this. And I blew through the first few episodes. Like if I hadn't been so busy the last 2 weeks and had so many things blow up in my face, I'd be done already. But I don't want to rush enjoying that show. And I'm glad I didn't rush the last episode of Obi-Wan. I waited like I think 3 weeks. And Stranger Things, the last episode of season 4, I'm trying to wait until I actually have time to, to actually watch it rather than 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there. I kind of want to watch it like a movie in one sitting. But I just
Yeah,
think that, like when we were talking about the Forgotten Realms books, I want fun, quick reads personally. There are other times, I'll read, for book club, I do the bigger ones or the Tolkiens and things like that. But for the
mm,
most part, I just want something to escape. I think is the, escape fantasy, I think is lacking nowadays. So when I saw yours, I'm like, oh, that's definitely an escape fantasy right there. So
oh, absolutely, yeah.
definitely my cup of tea. So super
I'm
cool.
glad to hear it.
Yeah. And I love your covers too. I was just like, I remember the day I found you. I can't remember what social media I found you on, because it was months ago, but I can't remember
Might
if
have
it
been
was like,
TikTok.
oh, it was TikTok. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was like, I think, yeah, I'm trying to remember which one popped up first, because I know a Noble's Quest was in there somewhere. I'm trying to remember which
I've
one.
also been a lot of the videos were about a Queen's Edict because
Yeah,
I
that's the
I,
one. Yep.
I just released that one. So
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. So I had to go back and look at the other ones. I was like, oh, these all look really cool. But yeah, that's like my kind of thing, is how I feel like you and I are very similar in style, in terms of the kind of books that, we want to write and the niche. I would say you're one of
yeah,
the few people that, I'd say we're in the same, the same subgenres, and things like that. So
It
there's
certainly sounds like it. Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to find people. You would think there's so many authors and things, but like me and Mark Timoney, he wrote The Blood of the Spear. Like we both love The Wheel of Time. We both love, Forgotten Realms, and have a lot of the same background and things. But in terms of love the same reading, but in terms of writing, very different. In terms of the type of story we want to tell. So I find at
Yeah.
times, it's hard to find people with similar interests, in terms of subgenre in particular. So that was super cool. That's one reason why I told my wife, I was like, I got to get Ryan on. I was like, I got to figure out how he did this and that. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So, I was like,
Well, I'm happy to talk about it. I'll talk shop all day.
that's perfect. Which actually leads me to the next one here. What sorts of strategies do you use writing full-length novels versus novellas?
Yeah, I put a lot of thought into that question when you sent it to me, and I don't think my process changes all that much.
Interesting.
Because I don't do heavy outlines to begin with. It's
Mm,
more that I have a concept, a framework, and I know who the characters are, where the plot is starting, and where I want it to go, and how it's going to get there. Um, and so a novella for me is just a story that doesn't have the same complexities and I mean, there are complexities, there's plot twists and stuff, but uh, I guess for me, my novellas focus on a single character. And so I, I'm thinking of Demon Invasion in particular, where
mm,
I wrote a novella based on the big bad from my second novel because I
mm.
liked him so much, but I didn't want to go back and do all of his backstory
Yeah,
and
yeah,
bloat the book.
yeah.
So I wrote that so I could really get a solid grasp on why is he there, what does he want to do in the future, all like, and his connections with other demons in the world and things like that. So it it's again, just like my novels, a quick pace, focusing on the plot twists, dialogue, and I'm not a fan of writing to a word count,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
where people are like, I need to write 100,000 words for this book. So and I finished writing the story in 70,000 words. So I need to put in another 30,000 words of filler, you know.
That reader's gonna
So
feel it at the end.
exactly, like it slows things down so much.
Yeah.
So if I can tell a story like Demon Invasion in 20,000 words and instead of going to a full novel length, then that's fine. Like it's so the process is very, very similar that I write what needs to be written. Each scene in the book should have a purpose and continue to drive the story forward, whether it's character development or plot or whatever. But I don't like just putting in fluff to get a book to a certain length. I don't know if that's helpful for you or not.
No, no, it really is. Sorry, I was just looking up because I must have missed Demon Invasion when I invited you on. So I was trying to save that one to check out for later. I didn't realize that was yours. So sorry, I was just saving that. Looks really interesting, by the way. Yeah, I struggle because people with Scrivener in particular, right? They're like, oh, I'm gonna write, like you said, like 110,000 pages or 10,000 words. It's gonna be this many pages, and I'm like, how? I was just talking about the other day. He asked me, he's like, well, how, like, what are you shooting for this novella? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I said, over 10K. I don't know, less than 25K, And I was like, the second one's going to be a lot bigger because of, what happens. I said, the third one's going to be probably the biggest. I said, overall, it'll probably be like the three eventually be like 75,000 words. I said, I don't know, maybe. And it just was an interesting thing when I sent that to you. I guess now it was a while ago, but he
Mhm.
kept asking me, he's like, well, what about this? What about this? I'm like, I don't know. Like, just as long as I tell the story, I said, there's certain things I'm sure I'll add or cut out, but it's interesting to me when I see people like, oh yeah, I got 1,000 words today out of 110,000 for this book. And I'm just like, how do you even know? Like,
Yeah. Like
and
I
and
my and
they're not planners, they're pantsers. So I'm like,
oh,
why even
that's
put that number there? Like, I
yeah.
get having a goal though, like I do
Yeah.
get that helps you with a goal, but I'm like, mine would be like, just say it, like mine would be like, oh, I'm gonna try to write 1,000 words, in a day to 1,500 for this many days to get to a relative count or whatever. But
Right.
yeah, it's like you said, I just feel like a lot of people end up with a lot of filler that way, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So like A Noble's Quest. I mean, I wrote the book as a standalone book because I wasn't even sure if anybody was going to like it.
Yeah. I think that's
And
smart in
so
an advertisement. Yeah, especially with
yeah,
first couple books. Yeah.
yeah. So I think it was 70,000 words
Hmm.
or 80,000 words, like fairly short for a fantasy novel, actually. But I had told the story that I wanted to tell. And so I was like, I'm just going to see how it does. And for the second book, it's quite a bit longer. I think it's around 100,000 words.
Oh wow.
Just because there was a lot going on in that book.
Yeah.
It's almost two stories in that book, like and then the third book was 120,000 or something like that,
Oh
because I
wow.
needed that many words to tell that story as
Yeah.
well. And again, it's almost like two stories in that book. Like the front end is quite a bit different from the back end, just a different feel to it. So you know, I just write as much as I need to write, and I don't worry about word count too much.
Yeah. I just think like I just personally think, I said to my buddy the day, I guess that was weeks ago. It seems like it was yesterday. It's so sad that it was like May, but it's just like, yeah, I agree. I think that there's so much more that we have to think about before a word count. I mean, you have to worry about just so many different things making sense, and world building, and just, keeping the flow and characterization. It's like the last thing I want to worry about is, really how many thousands of words I need for this before I even get there. I mean, and I always know people, they take it out, and Lindsay Broker is crazy about it too, because she'll take out like 35,000 words and then she'll add another 50,000, and I'm like, and she's I feel like she plots really well, from what I hear from her podcasts and, her blogs and things like that. And I just like, I give, people credit that can do that. I just don't think I'm, one of them. Maybe, when I'm deep in my career like she is, maybe I can then, do that. But yeah,
That's
right
the
now I'm
thing,
just
like,
like, I don't know,
and that's the thing. Every author has their own way of doing things too.
which
Like,
is a solid point. Yeah.
yeah, I don't like it when authors put up lists of this is how to write,
Oh,
this is
yeah.
how to find success,
Yep.
because you'll see so many famous authors even all have different ways that they go about the process. So uh, it just tells me that there isn't one way to write,
Yeah.
and one way to find success. Like there's a lot to do with luck and timing.
Yep.
Um, some people just write the right book at the right time and
Yep.
get the right people to read it and leave reviews, and it just all kind of snowballs and
Yep.
takes off. And that's great. But for them to then say, well, this is exactly what I did, when there's always that element of luck involved,
Yeah, you can't
someone might,
quantify it then. I mean, no
yeah,
matter what
because
you try to do.
I mean, if I followed, say, Stephen King put out a list for what he did for success, and I followed that to the letter, and I did not become a super famous author like Stephen King, um, you know, there's no list that you can just follow and be successful. Like
Yeah.
otherwise, everybody would be a successful author.
No, it's totally true. And that's like this podcast, and people are like, well, like, what were you trying to do? I'm like, well, in a year I was trying to get, I was honestly just trying to get 10 episodes done, and now we're on season 2, and the anniversary episode is going to be coming out August 28th, which is my birthday. I started August 26th last year, and now, by then, I'll be almost done with all of season 2, and
That's awesome.
yeah, the amount of people, like, I never would have thought that I'd be friends with, oh my gosh, I don't even know. It has to be like thousands of authors by this point, on social media and stuff. And, the amount of emails I get, or messages from people. I mean, I just never in a million years, would have thought a year ago, because I was like, oh, it was pretty much this week where I was like, I think I'm gonna start a podcast next year, or the next couple of weeks. And I was like, it probably won't go very far. And it's crazy to think, and I just think to myself, like, this is how writers feel, like this is how authors feel, is like you just pump out content. You, I feel, are as polite to people as possible, try and be as professional as possible, and just keep putting out content, and hopefully it's, you just try to improve, right? Make it good content. And I
Oh,
think at the end of the
exactly.
day,
Yeah.
that's the only thing you can do, right? Like,
Yeah.
just, you know,
Well, my girlfriend has been reading my books, or I've been reading the books to her because she likes it when I do voices for the characters.
that's
But
cool.
it's funny. We got through the first trilogy, and she enjoyed it, and then we've started the fourth book now. We're about 8 chapters in, but about 5 chapters in, she's like, I really don't want to insult you, but I'm really enjoying this book a lot more than like the first trilogy. And I'm
Oh,
like, why would that insult me? That's amazing. That I love hearing that my books are getting better as I
yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah.
That's the goal.
That's so crazy that you mentioned that, because Ash Bishop literally just said, like the first book that he's released right now was his fourth book. And then he just sold his, technically one that he fixed, which was technically his fifth book, as he called it. And it's so funny because I just mentioned that, like, you're one of like 30 authors within the last year that has said, third or fourth book was my better book. And that's, for me, is like, I'm planning on doing these 3 prequel novellas, fixing them, having them out. Because my fourth book, I want to be the one, like you just said, like
Right.
I want that, the one to that, I want the experience, of doing everything, and I'll have the world building done for it, because it's gonna be in the same world and characters and everything. And I'm like, I'm hoping that that's going to be the one that I actually release, after the wrap release for the novellas, where that's going to be the one where, does the traction. So I
Yeah.
pre-planned my fourth book to be, that kind of thing. So it's just so funny, the second author today within 5 hours that has said the same thing. So that's really
Yeah.
cool.
And that's another reason that I'm glad that I went the way I did, doing like a trilogy, and then now I'm doing a new 4 book series where um I feel like I learned so much writing that initial trilogy that if
Yeah.
people don't read it and just start with book 4, they can. Like, you don't need to read the first trilogy to understand what's going on in the new series.
Mm.
Like,
Oh, that's good to know.
there's certainly callbacks and stuff because it is in the history of these characters, but it's not necessary. Like, it's more like just having Easter eggs in there that people who have read the first 3 books will go, oh, I know who that is, and then get excited about remembering things that happened. Like, I just had that conversation with my girlfriend today. She was like, wait a minute, who's this first druid that they're talking about? It sounds really familiar. Was that? And I said, oh yeah, that was Jordak from the original trilogy. And she's like, oh, Jordak, yeah. And then it all came flooding back to her, and she remembered all of it. So yeah, there is that aspect of it. But if you're just reading it and you're like, okay, there was a first druid that did all this stuff, then that's fine.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's really cool. I like when stuff connects like that. I try to do that a lot, because as a reader, that's what I like. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's super cool. I think that's very smart of you personally to do. Like, why do a whole nother druid, right? When you have one that, you know, and if they like something about it, and then find out that that's the case. I mean, I think that just helps you with sales personally. So, and and helps deepen the story for the reader. So I think that's brilliant marketing to me. So I really like that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Hope it works out that way.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any writing tools or advice that you use on a regular basis?
In
Like, do you
terms
have
of
like your own
tool,
mantra? Like, is it like, I always
yeah.
just I always just say, like, the first parts to start. Like yesterday, I did not understand how I was gonna fix these last 2 scenes and write them. And I put it off for 3 days. That's my max now, is that I can put something off for 3 days, but that, next day I have to write, and it has to be something. So I just was like, I just start writing stuff, and it didn't work. So then I actually did what someone told me to do the other day. I actually videotaped myself talking it through, like an audiobook, and I hated what I had. So then I went to write, and then I was able to write because I had already, like, written, even though it was verbal. So for
Right.
me, like that was helpful. So I was just curious, like what is something that you do that helps you out to keep writing or maybe write better?
Um, in terms of tools, I know a lot of people use, like you mentioned, Scrivener before.
Mhm.
A lot of people do have like specific writing tools. I just use Word. I've got
My
tons of
favorite.
files on my computer,
Yeah.
and like I put them all in a creative folder, and then I have more folders in there for each project and subfolders. Just a ton of documents. And I also have a big file folder of papers, because sometimes I would, especially back when I used to take the bus to and from work, I would think of something that I wanted to write, and I was like, oh, I got to write that down.
Mm.
And so I've got just a ridiculous number of notes for things that I wanted to write. And then sometimes I forget that I wrote those notes. And so I get to the part, and I'm writing it, and it works out fine. I didn't need to look at the notes. But the other day I was going through them because somebody asked me about a map, and
Mm.
so I went and looked for like one of my original D&D maps, and I found a bunch of writing notes. And I was like, oh, it's amazing how close to these notes I got when I actually wrote the
Oh
final
wow.
book. Like I guess it must have just stayed in my subconscious after
Yeah, yeah.
scribbling it down.
Oh
Um,
wow.
but yeah, that's pretty much all that I use is just Word and paper notes, for tools.
I
Uh,
mean, OneDrive has saved my life. I just Scrivener so many times. Like I just don't have time, I feel like, to learn all of its tools that make it useful. And I like being able to get on OneDrive on my phone or any, device, particularly at work. It's like it's hard to pull up my laptop all the time and get onto Scrivener, but I can pull up OneDrive anywhere. So I think that
yeah,
that's yeah.
yeah, I've got my files on Dropbox.
Yep.
The same idea,
Yeah.
just you've got access to them wherever you are.
That's great advice too, though, right? Not just putting it on your laptop. Like Scrivener always freaks me out because then I'm like, Shakespeare did too. Because I was like, oh, it says it's in the cloud, and then I lost like 7,500 words from a book I was writing. So then I was like, oh, I'm gonna go back to Google Drive and in OneDrive because I just always want to make sure I have it in two places, not just on the device
Yeah,
itself. But
that's a really good idea, because yeah, it's heartbreaking when you lose a big chunk of writing that you spend a few hours on, and then it's just gone. I had that happen once when I was working on a laptop, and then the laptop died. So
oh, that's why I worry
well,
about this one. That's why I've been doing a lot of stuff on OneDrive, either on here or on my phone.
mhm,
That way I, still have it. I'll move like tonight after I should have done it yesterday, but I'll move my current chapter onto OneDrive from my phone from one of the apps, and then, I'll just have it. But I like how you said notes too, though. I do that a lot. I have one of these little notepad apps that I use quite frequently, and um, I think it's just called Notepad, and
yeah,
I just like have everything. It's not gonna pop up because it's so bright. But yeah, I just have the little tabs and everything, and I just want the audience to be able to see. It's not gonna. Oh, there it is. Yeah, I just have each of my books there, and I'll just literally be somewhere, like you said, on the train, and I keep my notes with me, but it was like I just had such a big folder. So now I've been putting my notes on there, and I have to say I actually never thought I would use a notepad digitally, but it's been very helpful. And then as soon as I get something done that I like, I just copy it, email it to myself, and then I'll take that email and later on put it in the Microsoft document and be good to go. But yeah, notes I
nice.
think is a big one for me. So I'm glad that you said that. Very similar there. So I wouldn't get anywhere
Yeah,
without my notes.
nope, nope, need those.
Yeah.
In terms of a mantra, I already said it. If I get bored writing it, people will be bored reading it. I always keep that in the back of my mind. I want to keep things moving.
Yeah.
Um, I don't want to get bogged down with, like, if I find that I'm over explaining something, then I'm like, okay, there's got to be an easier way to do this. I'm not a big fan of info dumps. I've got a couple of them in my first book, and I like reading through it. I've read my books to my kids, and reading through it, when I get to the info dump paragraph, I'm like, I wish I would have found a different way to do this. But
Yeah, yeah,
I try to give myself some grace. I was like, it was my first book.
yep,
It's okay. Just move on.
yeah, yeah. No,
Um,
that's very fair.
yeah.
I feel like.
And sorry.
Oh no, sorry, I cut out for a minute. Sorry.
Okay. In terms of advice that I draw on, um, uh, a lot of it comes from my ex-wife's aunt who did the editing for my books. She was so patient with me, especially when we first started out, because, like I said, I had more of a technical background. I never got
Mm,
to do the creative writing courses, so I didn't know all of the rules and stuff. And
mm.
she would highlight things and make notes and say this doesn't work because, or
Oh, that is helpful.
you're telling the readers this, there's better ways to show them, and explained what that meant. Because like I remember in English class, uh, the teacher would just write show don't tell, and I'd be like,
Yeah,
I don't know what that means.
yeah,
But
yeah.
he actually went through and like laid it out for me, so that I could understand it. Like, and she was good about finding the ticks that I have as a writer, verbal crutches and
Mm,
stuff like that. So in my first book, I had way overused the word massive.
mm.
And in some cases, I was using it incorrectly.
Oh,
Like you can't have it describing an area. Like you can't have a massive cave because it has no mass.
oh, that's
Um,
fair. Yeah, I never thought of that. I
yeah,
feel like a lot of people do that. I feel like I had to have done that at some point. Yeah,
I feel like I've read it before too.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, for
but
sure.
uh, but yeah, so she pointed that out, and I almost never use the word massive anymore. And
Mm,
this, even in this fourth book, she found like a writing structure that I used, that she didn't care for, and she pointed it out every time I used it and showed me how to fix it. So like, and but even then she said, the fourth book, it's like a completely different person is writing it from the first book that she
oh,
edited
that's
for
awesome.
me, because
Yeah,
I've learned so much from her along the way. And so when I get a manuscript to an editor now, it's much cleaner,
mm,
flows better. There's just way fewer problems with it.
yeah.
So yeah, I really try to keep all of her lessons in mind as I go through my work.
That's great advice. I also think that was great advice too. I mean, if you don't write, you don't learn, right? And you're never going to
No,
get
exactly.
better. So, yeah, you're going to
Yeah,
want to do it now or later. Might as well do it now and learn from it and
yeah.
get better stories.
So
So,
I would recommend that everybody get a good editor, and
it's a good
really
one.
collaborate with the editor.
Yeah.
Don't. I've heard of some authors who give a lot of pushback to their editors, and don't want to do the things that editors suggest. And I mean, in some cases, that's fine if it's like totally rewriting your story or whatever. But when it comes down to like the rules of writing and stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's always room to learn.
Yeah. That's very, very valuable advice. Speaking of advice, so what is one piece of advice you would give someone who is about to release their first novel?
Keep writing. I know that may
It
not be.
sounds simple, but it's a lot harder than it seems. Because after I got done with my first draft, I was like, "Oh, this is so hard," and I was like, "I'm just gonna take." I probably took like a 6 month break because, my friend was like, "Well, to be fair, he's like, it took you 14 years to finish writing a book, and then now you don't know what to do with it." And he was like, "That's okay." So yeah, I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I know it, and it's okay to take a pause to celebrate and be excited that you have finished your first book. But like I mentioned, most authors don't really start building their audience
Yep.
effectively until they've got 4 to 6 books out. So
Yep.
if you think you're going to write one book and hit it out of the park and become super famous, that almost never happens.
Yeah.
So for the vast majority of writers, you got to keep on working at it,
Yeah.
keep learning, keep. And I'm not saying like you have to write a series or something. Like you can write individual self-contained books, or even novellas or short stories. Just keep writing something.
Yeah.
Keep practicing your skills and stuff, because you are going to improve with every book that you put out. You're going to learn new things. Your readers are going to give you feedback, and if you're lucky to get constructive criticism from your readers, it's good to take that to heart and maybe learn some lessons from that as well.
Yeah.
uh, Definitely don't fight with a reviewer.
Yeah. Don't do that.
I've seen that happen to disastrous effects. Um, the and it's just ridiculous. Like, some people have sunk their careers before they've even started.
Oh,
I remember one writer uh, was still working on a first novel and put it up on Goodreads just as a placeholder type of thing. The book wasn't even out yet, and somebody came by, I guess, and saw this book, read the blurb, thought, it doesn't sound great, doesn't sound exciting, I'll give it 3 stars, and moved on. And
oh.
the author was like, how can you rate a book that's not even out yet? And like, the person was just like rating it so that it was on their their Goodreads, and they might look at it later when it was out, right? But so the writer got mad, and then the reviewer got mad, and the reviewer talked to their fellow reviewers on Goodreads, and they all dogpiled on and rated it 1 star and sunk it before it was finished. And so she was talking about giving up on writing, because what was the point in even finishing it when she was starting off with it being rated 1 star? um, so just, if somebody leaves a bad review, you just have to kind of grin and bear it, don't say anything, and keep going, because you will find your audience. You will find people who like what you write. Just try to keep in mind that no book is perfect. There's not a single book out there that everybody loves. And so, just kind of enjoy those good reviews when you get them, and recognize that your book's not for everybody.
Well, I mean, you look at Brandon Sanderson, who wrote 13 books before he fixed one, before it was, accepted by a traditional publisher, by Tor, and then, an agent. And then, you look at the fact that I met him 8 years ago, had no idea who he was. I knew he had written, some of the Wheel of Times. I think Aloe of Law was out at that point. Waybreaker and Elantris, I know, was definitely out. I went and found a copy of Way of Kings somewhere. It took me a while, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds cool," And I met Patrick Rothfuss, and The Name of the Wind had just came out. Yeah, but both of them, like, I don't know who they were. Like, I went to meet Kevin Hearn. That was the big one. Michael J. Sullivan was there, had his first 3 books out, and then Brandon had brought, his student Brian McClellan, Gunpowder Mage, and there were just a bunch of, really cool people. But yeah, like Brandon and Patrick were really cool. I had no idea who they were. I knew that they had written these books, but I hadn't read anything by them yet. And then the next thing I know, 3 weeks later, my friend's like, "Hey, hold on to both of those books," and I've been very, very careful in how I've, treated them. I haven't read either one of those books in particular because I didn't want to ruin the signatures and stuff. But yeah, it's crazy, like, to think that, they're 2 of the most popular of all time at this point, and there are so many people that don't like those 2 books. So
Yeah.
just goes to show you, like you said, right? Not every book is for everybody. So find
Yeah,
your
you'll
audience is a
find.
good piece of advice. So
Yeah. So that's why I like going to stuff like Comic Cons to
mhm.
sell my books, because there's so many sci-fi and fantasy fans there, that get really deep into their fandoms, and
Yep.
just, so if I can find people who love D&D especially, or fantasy in general, and they take a look at, I don't even have to say anything a lot of the time. They walk by my table, they see the artwork on the covers, and they're like, "Ooh, what's this?"
Yeah, yeah.
And it works out nice.
Yeah, no, totally. I feel like I was telling my mom, I'm like, I just got to get my products done. I'm like, I'm a salesman, and my parents have both, been sellers for a long time. And I was like, if there's one thing I can sell, it's going to be, my own product. Yeah, so I definitely, my friends are always talking about advertising this and this. I was like, I'll try whatever. I'm like, but I was like, I know for a fact that getting in front of people and, talking about books and, and things like that. And, I think passion really shines through when you make a sale like that. Because I don't
Yeah.
think you're just selling somebody on a product, right? Or a book, you're selling them on you know, your writing or your world and your
Yeah,
ability to tell a
exactly.
story. So
And I think that's why my fourth book since launch has been a little light on sales, because I haven't been going to conventions because
mm,
of COVID.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love going to conventions. Like I'm usually mostly an introvert, but when I get to those conventions and I get to talk about my books, and like, and people see how excited I get about the books, they're like, "Yeah, I want to give this a try." And some
Yeah,
people are like, "This sounds amazing. I'm getting the whole trilogy right away." And it just blows my mind when that kind of thing happens. That,
yeah, yeah,
someone just walking through the show sees the books and is like, "Yeah, this is for me."
yep. Yeah. Totally understand that. That's what I thought. I saw the first one. I was like, yeah, that's my thing right there. Uh, so this is a kind of let us really well into this one. So, who are some authors that make you want to write as soon as you read their books?
Well, we've already talked about R.A. Salvatore,
Yeah.
and
Oh, Bob, I tell you.
especially his Drizzt series. Like,
Yep.
I remember reading the Dark Elf trilogy when I was like probably 14 or 15, and
Yep.
it just
Oh, me
blew my
too.
mind.
Yeah. That was
I
that's
loved
when I picked them up. That's funny.
I loved it so much, and I got into Dragonlance as well. And I read a bunch of other stuff that R.A. Salvatore put out, like the Crimson Blade
Oh yeah.
trilogy.
Oh, that's a
Uh,
good one.
yeah, I love the Highway Halfling,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
one of my favorite characters. The Cleric Quintet,
Oh man.
um, like I just love the way he writes. You know,
Oh, I
it's
do. Yeah.
it's just a nice quick pace. The
Yep.
dialogue is fresh and good, and
Such a great
there's
narrative
there's,
style. You
there's
feel
so
like
much
you're there.
action. Yeah,
Yep.
it's it's definitely one of my favorites.
Yep.
I haven't kept up on his books
Oh, it's hard
recently.
because you just keep pumping them out.
I know. I think I forget what the last one was I read, but I remember Catterley died and was a ghost
Ghost
circling
King. Yep.
around.
That was one of
Yeah,
the two
yeah,
books that I cried at. That and then the next one called Hedrum. Yeah, so
yeah. And so
I'm
that's
really
about
sorry for the audience. That's not a spoiler because that's been out for like 15
so
years
many,
at this point.
so
Just
many
saying.
years, right?
Just saying, like that's like someone got mad that I talked about Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man and Endgame, and I was like, where have you been?
Yeah, if you care that much, you should have watched them by now.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man.
It's the same thing with the books. Like, I don't get mad if somebody spoils a Drizzt book for me, because I know it's going to be a while for me to get to the
Yeah.
newer stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he really inspired me, and actually, um, I've talked with him on Facebook before,
Oh, that's cool.
because after my daughter was born, I was rereading one of the books, the Cleric Quintet, and the character name came up that was the same name I named my daughter, and I hadn't even remembered that was the case. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is like, it must have just seeped into my subconscious," and I really wanted that name for my daughter, and so I messaged him and said that. He's like, "That's amazing! I love that."
That's cool.
Yeah, he's just such a down to earth guy. I really like
Yeah.
him as a person, and but so it not necessarily inspiring me the way that you mean, like inspired me to write, but uh, I look back at those Dragonlance books. Like, my kids bought me a couple of the Dragonlance books for Christmas, and
Oh, cool.
I read through the first one, and there's so much head hopping in like one
Oh,
paragraph. It's like,
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
character thinks this character thinks this character, and it's like, oh man. And so, like, some of it didn't hold up so well over time, and so that kind of inspires me too, that these authors got published and
Yeah,
their
and
books have been
popular,
read
yeah.
by millions of people,
Yeah,
so I can get there.
yeah. Oh, that's true. I never considered that, but that makes a lot of sense. That's like I was talking about Steven Erickson. I love the characters, love the books, but I'm like there's so many things where I personally would not do as a writer, but I learn a lot from that. I learn that my audience more that way, and I think that is actually really valuable advice as well. I hadn't considered that question from that perspective before, so I'm gonna have to kind of reanalyze my answers for that, I think. So that's
Well,
good.
I'm glad that I can bring something fresh to your podcast.
Yeah,
So many episodes in.
I don't think anybody has. I'm trying to think if anybody's even mentioned it that way before. So I guess I didn't take it that way, so I didn't consider it. So now I'm really have to think about that. So I feel like there's a lot of things, that I probably wouldn't do for various reasons, or I think that's why I write. It's like I want to, like you said, tell the stories I want to tell, and because those are the types I want to read. So there was one, oh, I know, there was one Eberron book, and I won't say who, but holy moly, I read 3 books, get done with the final fight, boss fight, everything's great, and then it's another one that's like so long. One of the main characters gets trapped in a sword, like his soul gets trapped in a sword, and the sword takes over his body. Well, I think
Okay.
what they had intended to do was that I think there was supposed to be another book after that, or trilogy. Well, then because Wizards, was switching things publication wise, that book never got written. So that great ending got ruined by the last like 2 pages for me. And
Oh, that sucks.
it's like I had a kid the other day tell me in school, I was like, oh, you guys can redo the quiz. Like, don't worry about it. He's like, oh, I was gone yesterday. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I go, just take it. I go, you guys take it as many times you need to. I said, the whole point's the learning, not the memorization. I said, I want
Right.
you to learn something from it. And he goes, oh, well, my history teacher at my school, because we're like a conglomeration of summer schools from different schools for kids. And he goes, well, my teacher marks you off 50%. I go, for being sick? What?
Hmm.
He goes, yeah,
Yeah.
rather than get 100 or a 0, you can get it and get 50 the next day. And I'm like, I get like if you didn't turn in an assignment after you were sick for a period of time, but I was like, I would never do that to you, and that's how I think about writing. I'm like, no, I'm gonna give you an ending. You might not like it, but I'm not
Yeah.
gonna give you an ending and then pull the carpet out from under you, because the
Yeah.
ending they had was so good. I was like, what editor on earth went through these 3 books that are fabulous with world building, characterization, plot, and then decided last minute after an amazing ending to do that for 2 pages? Like, even I think even in the next book, like it should have been like brought forth in the first couple of chapters that the sword was
Right.
taking over. I'm just like, it has stuck with me for the last like 6 years. I mean, it was. So I think that's where you're saying, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, because that's the kind of situation that I would never want to put my reader
Yeah.
in. Like,
No, I read one book a few years back that didn't even have an ending because she was writing, like she was planning on publishing like 3 books or 4 books a year or something like that. So she just wrote to the word count and then said, okay, that's 1 book and I will continue it on in the next book. And I was like, I don't want to read the next book because I don't trust that you're going to end this story.
yeah.
And I hadn't been enjoying it a whole lot to begin with anyway. But then when it just stopped, I was like, no, I'm not reading any more of this.
Oh man, yeah, things I would never do. That's crazy. Oh, that would drive me nuts.
Yeah.
Well,
No,
Ryan,
that's what you said about the story will have an ending. It may not be the one that you want, but
that's
it will end.
yeah, at least it ends, right? Yeah, not like
Yeah.
that. That's even worse than the one I read. The one I read, like, that's horrible. Oh man, I tell you. Well, Ryan, I really want to thank you for coming. But before we go, I want to make sure that we ask you if you have any promos, news, updates, current projects, or anything like that. Any news at all that you want to share with us?
Sure. So if people are looking for me on social media, I started a TikTok account earlier this year. I talk about writing in general. I talk about my books specifically, and I've got some videos of my cat and kids and life in Saskatoon. I've got over 1,000 followers on there. I'm not super active on it. Like I started out being really active daily, posting videos and stuff, but kind of slowed down on that after I got the 1,000 followers, because once you get 1,000 followers on TikTok, you can put a link in your bio.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
now I've got a link to my website, which is ryantoxpaeus.wordpress.com. Um, I rarely do promotions in terms of sales, once in a blue moon. So if people want to pick my books up, especially the first book, like the first book I'll do promos on more often. Second and third books, almost never. So if they want to get in, try it out at a low price of like 99 cents for the ebook, then they can go to my website and go to the contacts link at the top. And there's a spot where you can enter your email address and get into my mailing list. And anytime that I've got a promo going on, I'll send out an email blast
Oh,
in case
cool.
people want to check that out. I've got a couple of projects on the go. Like I said, I'm slowly picking away at my fifth novel, A Prophet's Request. I don't have a timeline for when that's going to be finished. It's just kind of whenever I get to it. And what I do have a timeline for is a short story that I'm working on for an anthology. It's a bunch of newer writers in and around the Saskatoon area.
Oh, cool.
One of my friends that I played D&D with started up this group, and so she's invited a bunch of people, and some of the authors and artists got together, and we're putting together this anthology now. So I've got kind of a historical character that pops up in the prologues and epilogues of my first trilogy, and I'm going back to look at his roots, where he came from, and the it's it's just again another fun project. Going to be a quick and easy read. It's about 10,000 words or something like that we put together. They asked for between 10 and 15,000. Are not getting paid for it, so I figured I'd go on the lower end of that, because that's still a fairly long short story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so that one's pretty fun. It's the anthology is called Debut. I don't know what the collective is called right now. I think they've changed names a couple of times,
Hmm.
so I don't know. When it comes out, I'll be sending an email out on that and updating my website and social media and all that kind of stuff. So if people are interested, that will be available. I'm not sure when. We're working on our second drafts this month.
Hmm.
So probably not this year, but early next year, I would imagine.
Oh, cool. Well, that's why it's important that everybody signs up for your newsletter. That way they get those updates and, follows the social media, which kind of leads us to our next part there that, you can follow Ryan's social media links. Click on them in the description. Go ahead and give him a follow. I do on TikTok. So got great stuff on there. That's how I found Ryan to begin with. So make sure you're going there. His links for where to find his website, his books, everything like that are also gonna be in the description. You guys know the drill who are listening. If you are a first time listener, we just always try and remind people to please review the books that you read, particularly for indie authors, because really that's the only way they're going to get more of them. So if you go and you like Ryan's for book one and you're like, oh, I want another one, like make sure to review and then do the same for those other consequent books after that. Ryan, thank you so much for coming. It was a real pleasure talking to you. It's funny when I can find somebody has similar reading and writing taste to me, so that's really cool. It's rare nowadays, even with how many people that I talk to in a day and a week and stuff. But I was really so happy that we could get you on today. In the future, you got anything going on, let me know ahead of time, and we'll figure out a good time and we'll get you back on, my friend.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Anytime you want to come back, whenever, and talk about X, Y, and Z, you let me know the topic and we'll figure it out and get you on and get you all situated. So if there's anything I can do in the meantime, tag me in TikTok, send me whatever, and email me anything you got and I'll share it on all of our platforms, and we'll do what we can to help you out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, not a problem. You have a good rest of the evening and I will talk to you later, my friend.
You too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.